3 hours ago, I signed an agreement that the West told us would never happen. For decades, NATO controlled who could defend whom. They told Saudi Arabia to obey. They forced Pakistan to bend. They treated Africa as nothing but a resource pit. But today, those chains snapped. Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Africa now stand together under one defense pact. The West was not invited. NATO was not consulted. And now, their generals are sweating, their media is screaming, and their leaders are demanding answers. They call it dangerous. I call it freedom. This is the moment that changes everything. The moment when three powers decided to stop begging for permission and start building their own destiny. I have watched how they humiliated us for decades. They staged coups when our leaders spoke too loudly. They assassinated those who dreamed of unity. They used NATO, not for security, but for control to keep us divided and weak. I grew up hearing the same lie. Africa cannot defend itself. Muslims cannot unite. You need NATO. You need America. For 70 years, they perfected this game. Divide and conquer. Keep the strong nations separated. Make sure no alliance forms without their permission. Force every defense agreement to run through Washington or Brussels first. They told Saudi Arabia, your security depends on our bases. They told Pakistan, your survival requires our approval. And we believed them. We accepted their terms. We signed their papers. We hosted their troops. We followed their orders. But something changed. Something they never saw coming. And yet today, without NATO, without America, we proved them wrong. I stood with generals from Pakistan, ministers from Saudi Arabia, and leaders from across Africa. And I told them, if we remain divided, we remain slaves. If we unite, no empire can touch us. That is why NATO panics, not because of threats, but because for the first time, they cannot dictate our alliances. This is not just a pact of signatures. It is a pact of soldiers, a pact of resources, a pact of blood. Let me tell you what this alliance really means. When I sat in that room 3 hours ago, watching as the final documents were signed, I witnessed history being rewritten in real time. Saudi Arabia brings wealth that can fund armies, influence that spans the Islamic world, and energy resources that keep economies running. Pakistan brings nuclear knowledge, battle-hardened military experience, and strategic position connecting Central Asia to the Arabian Sea. Africa brings the courage that broke colonial chains, the resilience that survived genocide, and a youth population that refuses to kneel. Together we form what NATO fears the most: independence. This isn't ceremonial cooperation. We're talking about joint military exercises across 3 continents, shared intelligence networks that bypass Western monitoring, coordinated defense strategies that don't require approval from foreign capitals, resource sharing that makes sanctions meaningless. When Pakistani generals train with Saudi officers on African soil, they're not just sharing tactics, they're building bonds that can't be broken by Western pressure. When Saudi investment flows into African infrastructure projects protected by Pakistani nuclear guarantees, they're creating economic relationships that don't depend on Western banks. I remember the look on the Western diplomats' faces when we announced it. Pale, confused, angry. They could not believe it was kept secret until the last moment. Their spies failed. Their intelligence failed. Their arrogance blinded them. For months, we planned in silence, meetings disguised as trade discussions, military consultations hidden behind cultural exchanges, financial agreements buried in routine diplomatic visits. They thought they had eyes everywhere. They thought their surveillance networks could track every alliance before it formed. They thought wrong. And now, the ink is dry. The message is clear. NATO's monopoly is broken. I hear them now. NATO commanders shouting in closed meetings, American senators warning of destabilization, European journalists calling me a dictator. Let them scream. Their panic is my proof. Within an hour of our announcement, emergency sessions were called in Washington. Within 2 hours, European defense ministers were demanding briefings from their intelligence services. Within 3 hours, NATO headquarters was buzzing with activity that hadn't been seen since the Cold War. The phone calls started immediately, threats disguised as diplomatic concern, warnings wrapped in friendly advice, pressure applied through every channel they could think of. This is destabilizing the region, they said. This threatens international security, they claimed. This violates the established order, they insisted. But what they really meant was, how dare you make decisions without asking us first? For decades, they called us partners. But partnership meant obedience. Obedience meant silence. Silence meant death. I am not here to be silent. I am here to tell them Africa will never again be NATO's playground. They send threats of sanctions. I laugh. They talk of isolation. I say, isolate yourself. We are no longer begging for seats at your tables. We are building our own. Watch their media right now. CNN is calling it dangerous escalation. BBC terms it a threat to Western interests. French news outlets are demanding government response to African aggression. Aggression? We signed a defensive alliance. We committed to mutual protection. We agreed to coordinate our security. Since when is defense aggression? Since it threatens their control. Since it proves their irrelevance. Since it shows the world that NATO was never about security, it was about submission. NATO's greatest fear is not my speeches. It is not even our weapons. It is our unity. And today, they saw it with their own eyes. Do you know why the West is desperate to crush this alliance? Because it kills their oldest weapon, division. For centuries, they perfected the art of keeping strong nations apart. They made sure African countries fought each other instead of uniting. They ensured Middle Eastern powers remained suspicious of each other. They guaranteed that South Asian nations stayed focused on local conflicts instead of global cooperation. But this pact changes everything. For Africa, this pact is the shield we were denied for centuries. No more French troops pretending to protect us while stealing our gold. No more American bases using our land as chessboards. No more European peacekeeping forces that somehow always end up protecting Western mining operations. When Burkina Faso faces external threats, Pakistani military advisors will be there. When African resources are targeted by foreign corporations, Saudi financial power will back our resistance. When our youth demand education and opportunity, this alliance will provide pathways that don't require Western approval. For Saudi Arabia, it means no more blackmail. Washington cannot freeze your oil money if your defense lies in your own hands. Brussels cannot dictate your energy policies when your security comes from brothers who understand your values. London cannot threaten your investments when your military partnerships span continents. For Pakistan, it means no more IMF chains disguised as aid. No more being dragged into wars that are not yours. No more choosing between superpowers who both see you as expendable. Your nuclear capabilities become shields for allies who respect your sovereignty instead of threats to neighbors who fear your strength. For all of us, it means this: when one is attacked, we all stand. When one is threatened, we all answer. This alliance creates a zone of independence that stretches from Dakar to Islamabad, a region where decisions are made by people who live there, not by bureaucrats in distant capitals who have never felt the weight of colonialism or the sting of imposed poverty. This pact is not charity, it is justice. It is the revenge of nations once enslaved. And I told the room as I signed, the time of kneeling is over. The age of standing has begun. But there's something deeper here that NATO fears even more than our military cooperation, our example. Right now, leaders across the global south are watching. They're seeing that major powers can cooperate without Western permission. They're witnessing defense alliances that don't require NATO approval. They're learning that sovereignty is not a gift from former colonial masters, it's a right that can be claimed. I know NATO is watching this right now. I know your analysts are typing reports about me. So let me speak to you directly. You spent decades building a system where every significant military alliance required your approval, where every major defense agreement needed your blessing, where every strategic partnership had to fit within your framework. You created a world where sovereign nations had to ask permission before defending themselves, where independent countries needed your consent before choosing their own allies, where free peoples required your authorization before determining their own security arrangements. That world ended 3 hours ago. You call us dangerous because we refuse to obey. You call us radicals because we refuse to be robbed. You call us threats because we refuse to die quietly. Yes, I am dangerous, but only to your empire. Yes, I am a radical, but only against your lies. Yes, I am a threat, but only to your domination. You spent centuries colonizing us. You carved up our continents. You stole our resources. You enslaved our peoples. You destroyed our civilizations. And when we finally fought for independence, you replaced direct occupation with indirect control. You made us dependent on your banks. You forced us to use your currencies. You insisted we buy your weapons. You demanded we host your bases. You required we follow your rules. And for decades we complied. We played by your rules. We accepted your terms. We believed your promises. But promises made by empires to their subjects are not worth the paper they're written on. Now, for the first time, you feel what we felt. Fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of becoming irrelevant. Fear of watching your monopoly crumble. And that fear will only grow. Because every alliance you break, we will rebuild stronger. Every leader you smear, another will rise. Every sanction you throw, we will turn into strength. You cannot stop a people who have already decided to be free. Your military might couldn't stop us in Algeria. Your economic pressure couldn't break us in Iran. Your political manipulation couldn't divide us in Vietnam. And your threats won't stop this alliance. Because this time, we're not fighting alone. I hear the whispers, but Traoré, they will come for you. Let them come. I am a soldier. I was born in resistance. If they think they can scare me with the same tactics they used on others, they are wrong. I know their playbook. First, they'll try to isolate me politically. They'll pressure other African leaders to distance themselves from this alliance. They'll offer bribes disguised as development aid. They'll make promises they have no intention of keeping. When that fails, they'll escalate to economic warfare, sanctions on our resources, freezing of assets in Western banks, pressure on international organizations to exclude us from global forums. When that fails, they'll move to more direct methods. Character assassination through their media networks, support for opposition groups that promise to be more cooperative, interference in our internal affairs disguised as promoting democracy. And if all of that fails, they'll consider more extreme measures. The kind that turned Libya from Africa's richest nation into a failed state. The kind that destroyed Iraq's infrastructure and left millions dead. The kind that keeps Syria bleeding after more than a decade of war. But here's what they don't understand. This is not the 1,960 seconds. This is not the era when a single African leader could be eliminated to destroy Pan-African dreams. This alliance involves nuclear powers. This partnership spans 3 continents. This unity cannot be broken by eliminating any one person. They say NATO is the most powerful alliance on Earth. But today, that myth has cracks. Today, the soldiers of Burkina Faso, the sons of Saudi Arabia, the generals of Pakistan, they all stood together. And when unity enters the battlefield, no army of mercenaries can break it. I am not afraid of NATO. I am not afraid of their planes, their bombs, or their sanctions. I am only afraid of one thing: betrayal within. History shows us that the only way empires destroy genuine liberation movements is by turning us against each other. They'll offer some of our leaders better deals. They'll promise some of our nations special treatment. They'll try to convince some of our people that this alliance will bring more suffering than salvation. That's why the real battle isn't military, it's psychological. It's the battle for hearts and minds, the battle between their propaganda and our truth, the battle between their fear and our hope. So I tell my brothers and sisters across Africa, Arabia, and Asia, stay awake. Do not let them buy your leaders. Do not let them poison your minds. Do not let them divide us again. Every time we've united in the past, they've found ways to break us apart. But every time we've broken apart, we've learned how to unite more effectively. This time will be different. This time, we're ready for their tactics. This time, we understand that our unity is their greatest fear. This pact is not just for presidents and generals. It is for you, the worker, the farmer, the student, the mother. When NATO threatens us, they are not attacking me. They are attacking you. Your bread, your land, your future. Every sanction they impose makes your life harder. Every pressure campaign they launch reduces your opportunities. Every alliance they break leaves you more vulnerable to their exploitation. But when we rise together, no empire can defeat us. This alliance means Pakistani engineers working on African infrastructure projects. It means Saudi investment in schools and hospitals from Dakar to Islamabad. It means African youth studying in Pakistani universities and Saudi institutions. It means cultural exchange that strengthens our bonds beyond politics. This alliance means your children will grow up in a world where being African, Arab, or South Asian is not a disadvantage to overcome but a strength to celebrate. Where your natural resources serve your development instead of enriching foreign corporations. Where your labor builds your nations instead of sustaining distant empires. I ask you now, stand with us. Speak the truth. Refuse their propaganda. Refuse their bribes. Refuse their intimidation. When they tell you this alliance is dangerous, remind them that the most dangerous thing for oppressed people is remaining divided. When they claim this partnership threatens stability, ask them whose stability they're really worried about. When they warn about regional tensions, point out that the greatest tension comes from foreign military bases on sovereign soil. This is not the pact of 3 nations. This is the pact of billions of people who are tired of kneeling. From the young woman in Karachi who dreams of opportunities that don't require Western approval, to the farmer in Burkina Faso who wants to sell his crops at prices that aren't dictated by European markets, to the engineer in Riyadh who envisions technology that serves human development instead of military domination, this alliance serves you. And to those still afraid, I say this: courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is acting despite fear. And today, we choose courage. Fear would have kept us divided. Fear would have made us accept their terms forever. Fear would have convinced us that we're too weak, too poor, too different to stand together. But we chose hope over fear. Unity over division. Sovereignty over submission. That choice will define not just our generation, but the generations that follow us. 3 hours ago, the world shifted. NATO knows it, Washington knows it, Brussels knows it. But the real question isn't whether they know it, it's what they're going to do about it. And now, the question is simple. Will they accept this new reality, or will they try to crush it? Their response in the coming days will tell us everything we need to know about whether this alliance will face diplomatic pressure or military aggression, whether they'll try to divide us through economic warfare or attempt to destroy us through more direct means. I am ready for either answer. But remember, this history will not remember their threats. It will remember our stand. Today we told the world, Africa will not bow, Arabia will not bow, Pakistan will not bow. And if NATO dares to test us, they will finally learn what resistance truly looks like, because this time, we are not alone. This time, when they pressure one of us, they pressure all of us. When they threaten one of us, they threaten all of us. When they attack one of us, they attack all of us. The age of picking us off one by one is over. The era of divide and conquer has ended. The time of isolated resistance has passed. This alliance isn't just about defense, it's about offense. Not military offense, but offensive against the system that kept us weak. Offensive against the structures that maintained our dependence. Offensive against the lies that convinced us we couldn't survive without their permission. 3 hours ago, we declared our independence from their control. Now we'll see if they respect that independence or if they'll try to destroy it like they've destroyed so many liberation movements before. But here's what they need to understand. We've studied their tactics. We've learned from our predecessors' mistakes. We've prepared for their response. And we're ready for whatever comes next. The question is, are they ready for us? But let me tell you what this alliance really represents beyond the military cooperation and political defiance. This is about breaking the psychological chains that have bound our minds for generations. I was raised, like many of you, to believe that Western approval was necessary for legitimacy, that their universities were the only ones that mattered, that their currencies were the only ones that held real value, that their weapons were the only ones that provided real security. This mental colonization runs deeper than any physical occupation ever could. They didn't just control our resources, they controlled how we thought about ourselves. When I walked into that signing ceremony 3 hours ago, I carried the weight of every African child told they weren't smart enough, every Pakistani student denied opportunities because of their passport, every Saudi innovator ignored because their ideas came from the wrong part of the world. This alliance isn't just military, it's educational. Pakistani universities will partner with African institutions without requiring Western accreditation. Saudi research centers will collaborate with both African and Pakistani scientists on projects that serve our people's needs, not Western corporate interests. We're talking about creating knowledge networks that bypass their academic gatekeepers, technology transfer that doesn't require their approval, innovation hubs that develop solutions for tropical diseases, desert agriculture, and urban planning challenges that Western institutions have ignored for decades because there's no profit in helping us. But there's something even deeper happening here. For the first time in generations, we're defining success on our own terms. Their definition of progress meant copying their systems. Their definition of development meant becoming more like them. Their definition of civilization meant abandoning our own cultures and adopting theirs. No more. This alliance represents 1.8 billion people who refuse to measure their worth by Western standards, who refuse to see their cultures as obstacles to overcome rather than strengths to celebrate, who refuse to treat their religions as backwardness to abandon rather than wisdom to preserve. Let me break down what this alliance means economically, because that's where their real panic begins. For decades, They forced us into a global economic system designed to extract our wealth and transfer it to their banks. We sold them raw materials at prices they controlled. We bought back finished products at prices they inflated. We borrowed money from their institutions at interest rates that guaranteed permanent debt. This alliance changes that equation fundamentally. Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth funds will now invest directly in African infrastructure and Pakistani industries without routing through Western financial institutions. Pakistani manufacturing capabilities will serve African markets without needing European middlemen. African raw materials will fuel Saudi and Pakistani industries that produce finished goods for our own consumption. We're talking about creating trade relationships that bypass their currency controls, investment flows that don't depend on their approval, economic partnerships that generate wealth for our peoples instead of draining it toward their capitals. When Pakistani textile manufacturers start using African cotton to produce clothes for Saudi markets, paid for in currencies we control, we eliminate 3 layers of Western extraction from that single transaction. When Saudi agricultural investment transforms African farmland to feed Pakistani populations, using Pakistani technology adapted for African conditions, we create food security that doesn't depend on Western grain companies. When African mineral wealth powers Saudi renewable energy projects that provide electricity for Pakistani industrial zones, we build energy independence that their oil companies can't disrupt. This isn't just about defense cooperation, it's about economic liberation from systems designed to keep us permanently dependent. And they know it. Their economists are already calculating the potential losses. Their corporations are already lobbying their governments to pressure us. Their banks are already strategizing about how to maintain control over financial flows they've dominated for centuries. But here's what they're learning. When sovereign nations with real resources decide to cooperate directly, their intermediary role becomes optional. And optional middlemen tend to become irrelevant middlemen very quickly. There's another dimension to this alliance that terrifies them even more than military cooperation or economic independence: cultural confidence. For generations, they convinced us that their way of life was superior, that their values were universal, that their entertainment, their fashion, their social systems represented the pinnacle of human development. They exported their movies to teach our children to admire their heroes. They promoted their music to make our youth want to imitate their lifestyles. They funded their news outlets to ensure our people saw the world through their perspectives. This cultural imperialism was perhaps their most effective weapon, because when people believe the oppressor's culture is superior, they begin to oppress themselves. But this alliance represents a cultural awakening that spans 3 continents. Pakistani cinema will tell stories that resonate in African markets. Saudi media will produce content that celebrates values shared across our alliance. African music will find new audiences in Pakistani and Saudi communities who recognize common experiences of struggle and dignity. We're talking about creating cultural ecosystems that don't need Western approval or distribution networks. Entertainment that teaches our children to be proud of who they are rather than ashamed of what they're not. When young people in Karachi watch movies about African heroes, they learn that courage comes in many colors. When students in Riyadh read Pakistani literature, they discover that wisdom speaks many languages. When children in Burkina Faso hear Saudi poets, they understand that faith takes many forms but shares common roots. This cultural exchange strengthens our alliance in ways that military treaties never could, because when peoples genuinely respect and understand each other, their leaders' cooperation becomes unbreakable. And this is what keeps Western cultural producers awake at night. The possibility that 3 continents worth of creative talent might stop looking to Hollywood and London for validation and start creating content that serves their own people's spiritual and intellectual needs. The timing of this alliance isn't accidental. It coincides with a generational shift that Western powers completely misunderstood. The young people signing up for our militaries, studying in our universities, starting businesses in our economies, may be they didn't grow up during the Cold War. They don't remember when Western approval felt necessary for survival. They grew up watching Western interventions fail in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria. They witnessed Western economic systems crash in 2008 while being lectured about fiscal responsibility. They saw Western societies fracture over issues they claimed to have resolved decades ago. This generation doesn't see Western systems as superior. They see them as alternative approaches with significant flaws and limited applicability to our contexts. When I spoke to young officers from all 3 regions before signing this pact, their enthusiasm wasn't based on anti-Western sentiment. It was based on our own people's sentiment. They want to serve militaries that defend their own communities rather than foreign interests. They want to build economies that enrich their own families rather than distant shareholders. This alliance gives them that opportunity. Pakistani military academies will train African officers using tactics developed for our terrains and climates. Saudi defense universities will research technologies that serve our strategic needs rather than global market demands. African military colleges will teach leadership principles rooted in our own successful resistance movements rather than imported theories. We're creating institutions that produce leaders who think like us, understand our challenges, and remain committed to our people's welfare. And when these young leaders reach senior positions over the next 2 decades, they'll expand this alliance in ways we can barely imagine today. Because for them, cooperation with each other will feel natural, while dependence on former colonial powers will feel absurd. Here's something Western analysts haven't fully grasped about this alliance. We're not trying to catch up to their technology, we're preparing to leapfrog it. Their military-industrial complexes are optimized for conventional warfare between industrial powers, but our security challenges require different solutions. Desert warfare, urban counterinsurgency, maritime protection for long coastlines, and defense against hybrid threats that combine military, economic, and information warfare. Pakistani engineers understand mountainous terrain defense. Saudi researchers know desert conditions better than any Western laboratory. African innovators have mastered low-cost, high-impact solutions that work in resource-constrained environments. When we combine this knowledge, we don't produce inferior copies of Western weapons systems, we create superior solutions for our specific challenges. Pakistani drone technology adapted for African savanna conditions. Saudi solar-powered communication systems designed for Pakistani mountain regions. African mineral processing innovations that support Saudi and Pakistani manufacturing needs. We're talking about technology transfer that serves our strategic priorities rather than their commercial interests. Research partnerships that address our people's problems rather than their market opportunities. And because we're starting this cooperation now, while artificial intelligence and renewable energy are still developing rapidly, we have the chance to shape these technologies from the beginning, rather than accepting whatever versions they decide to export to us. 5 years from now, when our defense industries are producing equipment specifically designed for our environments, using our materials, manufactured by our workers, and upgraded by our engineers, their weapons exports to our regions will become irrelevant. 10 years from now, when our technological cooperation has produced innovations they didn't anticipate, they'll be trying to buy our patents instead of selling us their outdated systems. This alliance won't stop with 3 regions. It can't. The logic that brought us together applies to other nations that have been pressured to choose between great powers that neither understand nor respect them. I've already received inquiries from leaders across Southeast Asia, Latin America, and even Eastern Europe. Nations that are tired of being treated as junior partners in alliances designed to serve other people's interests. The success of our cooperation will demonstrate that major powers can work together without Western mediation, that defense agreements don't require NATO approval, that economic partnerships don't need Western financial institutions, that technological collaboration doesn't depend on Western universities. Every successful joint military exercise we conduct proves that South-South cooperation can provide real security. Every profitable trade agreement we negotiate demonstrates that we don't need Northern intermediaries. Every technological breakthrough we achieve shows that innovation happens everywhere, not just in their research centers. And other nations are watching, learning, planning their own partnerships based on our example. Within 5 years, I predict we'll see similar alliances forming between Latin American and Southeast Asian nations, between Eastern European and Central Asian countries, between Pacific Island nations and Caribbean states. The world is reorganizing itself along new lines, not East versus West, but independent regions cooperating as equals versus imperial centers trying to maintain dominance over everyone else. And this reorganization is irreversible, because once peoples taste genuine equality in international relationships, they never willingly return to subordination. So here's what happens next, and I want to be completely honest about the challenges we'll face. They will try to destroy this alliance, not through direct military confrontation, any tainted BNS. They're not stupid enough to attack nuclear powers simultaneously, but through every other means available. Economic warfare first, sanctions designed to strangle our trade relationships, pressure on international organizations to exclude us from global forums, manipulation of commodity prices to destabilize our economies. Then information warfare. Their media will work overtime to portray this alliance as aggressive, unstable, and threatening to global peace. They'll find dissidents in our countries to amplify. They'll manufacture crises to justify intervention. Finally, they'll attempt divide and conquer tactics refined over centuries of imperial control. They'll offer special deals to whichever member of our alliance seems most vulnerable. They'll create artificial conflicts between us to strain our unity. But here's why their traditional tactics won't work this time. We've studied their methods, we know their playbook, we've prepared countermeasures they haven't anticipated. Our economic cooperation is too deep for sanctions to break quickly. Our cultural bonds are too strong for propaganda to dissolve easily. Our mutual defense guarantees are too credible for divide and conquer tactics to work effectively. Most importantly, our peoples understand what's at stake. This isn't just another diplomatic arrangement that leaders can abandon when pressure mounts. This alliance represents the hopes of billions of people who have waited generations for genuine independence. They cannot offer any of our nation's deals better than what we're building together. Because what we're building isn't just about military protection or economic benefit, it's about dignity, respect, and the right to determine our own destinies. 3 hours ago, when I signed that agreement, I wasn't just creating a military alliance. I was participating in the birth of a new world order. An order where former colonies become genuine equals, where different civilizations cooperate without one dominating the others, where people's worth is measured by their contributions to human welfare rather than their submission to imperial hierarchies. This alliance will succeed not because we're stronger militarily than NATO, though our combined capabilities are formidable, not because we're wealthier than the West, though our resources are vast, but because we represent something they cannot offer, a future where every nation's sovereignty is respected and every people's dignity is protected. And when that future arrives, and it will arrive, history will remember this moment. 3 hours ago, when the chains finally broke, when the age of empires finally ended, when the era of genuine equality finally began, NATO can prepare their response, the West can plan their counterattacks, former colonial powers can strategize their comeback attempts. But they're fighting against more than just 3 regions now. They're fighting against an idea whose time has come, that the strong should protect the weak, not exploit them. That cooperation should benefit all participants, not just the powerful. That the future belongs to those who build bridges, not those who maintain walls. And ideas, once they take root in billions of minds, become unstoppable. The world shifted 3 hours ago, not just geopolitically, morally, spiritually, permanently. And we were there to witness it.